But dust settled in the wake of Samuel Blackwood's horse as he rode into the small town of Redemption Creek. At 53, his weathered face told stories of hardship and triumph that words alone could never capture. His silver-streaked, dark hair peeked out from beneath a worn Stetson, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the town's main street with practiced vigilance. 20 years as a Texas Ranger had taught him never to enter a new place without knowing all possible exits. Samuel had come to Redemption Creek with purpose, to fulfill a promise made to a dying Comanche chief who once spared his life during the border conflicts of the 1870s. The chief's daughter, Mourning Dove, had disappeared 3 months ago, and Samuel had pledged to find her, a debt of honor he intended to pay in full. As he passed the general store, saloon, and sheriff's office, he could feel the curious eyes of townsfolk following him, the stranger who brought with him the dust of long trails and the mysteries of the vast Texas plains. Friends, I'd love to kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm curious, what city are you watching from today? Samuel dismounted outside the modestly sized hotel, patting the neck of his faithful buckskin mare, Dakota. "Rest easy, girl, we might be here a while," he murmured as he tied her to the hitching post. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, causing sweat to trickle down his temple. Redemption Creek had sprung up from nothing after silver was discovered in the nearby foothills 5 years ago. Now it stood as a tenuous outpost of civilization, balanced precariously between the comforts of settled life and the untamed wilderness. The town had grown quickly, but Samuel knew such rapid expansion often brought trouble alongside prosperity. As he climbed the weather-worn steps to the hotel, his hand instinctively hovered near the Colt peacemaker on his hip, a habit born from decades of facing the unexpected. The small silver star he kept in his pocket, a gift from the Comanche chief, seemed to weigh heavier with each step. Finding Mourning Dove would not be simple, especially if she didn't want to be found. The hotel lobby offered blessed relief from the heat. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, stirring the stagnant air just enough to be noticeable. Behind a polished oak counter stood a thin man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Afternoon, stranger. Looking for a room?" the clerk asked, eyeing Samuel's trail-worn appearance with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Samuel nodded, placing a few silver coins on the counter. "Just passing through," he replied, a practiced lie that had served him well over the years. The less people knew about his business, the better his chances of success. "Any chance you've seen a young Comanche woman in town recently? Goes by the name Mourning Dove?" The clerk's expression shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes that told Samuel there was a story there. "Can't say that I have," the clerk answered, too quickly, avoiding Samuel's gaze as he pushed a registry book forward. "But Sheriff Miller might know more about folks passing through." Samuel signed the ledger with practiced indifference, taking the room key with a nod of thanks. His weathered boots creaked against the wooden stairs as he climbed to the second floor. Room 203 was spare but clean. A bed, a washstand, a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the main street. He set his saddlebags on the bed and moved to the window, watching the town go about its business. Redemption Creek was hiding something, or someone, and Samuel had learned long ago that secrets in small towns were both closely guarded and surprisingly easy to uncover if you knew where to look. The saloon would be his first stop after nightfall, when whiskey loosened tongues and men forgot to be careful about what they said and to whom. But first, he needed to pay a visit to Sheriff Miller. Lawmen recognized each other, even when they weren't wearing badges, and Samuel needed to establish whether the sheriff would be an ally or an obstacle in his search. The sheriff's office smelled of leather, gun oil, and coffee. Sheriff Jeremiah Miller looked up from his paperwork as Samuel entered, his hand dropping casually to rest near his holstered revolver. At around 40, Miller had the look of a man who had seen enough trouble to remain permanently vigilant, but not enough to make him bitter. "Help you, mister?" he asked, taking in Samuel's appearance with the practiced eye of a lawman. Samuel removed his hat, a gesture of respect between equals. "Name's Samuel Blackwood, former Texas Ranger. Looking for someone who might have passed through your town." Miller's expression remained neutral, but Samuel caught the slight tensing of his shoulders. "Former Ranger, you say? What brings you to my jurisdiction without the courtesy of announcing yourself first?" There was no hostility in the question, merely professional caution, and Samuel respected that. "Not here on official business. Personal matter, a debt I aim to repay." Sheriff Miller nodded slowly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat, Blackwood. Coffee?" Samuel accepted both offers, settling into the chair with the ease of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. The coffee was strong and bitter, just how he liked it. "I'm looking for a Comanche woman named Morning Dove, daughter of Chief White Eagle. I made a promise to her father before he died that I'd ensure her safety." He watched Miller's reaction carefully, noting the flicker of recognition in the sheriff's eyes. Miller set down his cup deliberately, considering his words. "We don't get many Indians in town these days, what with the reservations and all. But there was a young Comanche woman who passed through about 2 months back. Didn't catch her name. She was with Arthur Harrison, owns the Silver Strike mine up in the foothills. Respectable businessman, or so folks say." Samuel felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. "This Harrison? He in the habit of keeping company with Comanche women?" Miller's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Harrison does as he pleases in this town. His mine employs half the men here, and his money keeps the other half fed. But between you and me, there have been rumors. Young women, Indian, Mexican, even white, finding work at his estate. Some say it's honest employment. Others—" He trailed off, letting Samuel fill in the blanks. "Others say it's something else entirely," Samuel finished, his voice flat. Miller nodded, looking suddenly tired. "I can't prove anything, and without proof, moving against a man like Harrison would be suicide, professionally and maybe literally. His foreman, Jackson, is quick with a gun and has 3 former bounty hunters working security at the estate." The setting sun cast long shadows across the town as Samuel left the sheriff's office. His mind was already mapping out a plan. If Morning Dove was at Harrison's estate, whether by choice or coercion, he needed to find out more before making any moves. 20 years of tracking outlaws had taught him patience. Rushing in would only get them both killed. He would need to be strategic, gather information, and find potential allies. The saloon across the street, the Lucky Strike, seemed a logical place to start. Where there was liquor, there were loose tongues, and where there was money changing hands, there were eyes that noticed everything. Samuel adjusted his hat against the dying sun and made his way toward the saloon's swinging doors. The familiar weight of his Colt, a reassuring presence against his hip. The Lucky Strike saloon hummed with the energy of men unwinding after a day's labor. Piano music competed with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses as Samuel pushed through the swinging doors. He paused just inside, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimmer light while taking stock of the room. Exits, windows, troublemakers, and potential allies, all cataloged in seconds. He made his way to the bar, where a heavy-set man with impressive mustaches was pouring whiskey with practiced efficiency. "Rye, if you've got it," Samuel said, placing a coin on the worn wooden surface. The bartender nodded, producing a glass and a bottle without comment. Samuel took a measured sip, savoring the burn as he turned to survey the room more carefully. At a corner table, a woman in a deep purple dress dealt cards with fluid grace. Something in her bearing caught his attention, a dignified poise that seemed at odds with her surroundings. "Name's Eleanor Dupree," the bartender said, following Samuel's gaze. "Owns this place. Came out here 3 years ago from New Orleans after her husband died. Shrewd businesswoman. Knows more about what happens in this town than the sheriff and the preacher combined." Samuel nodded his thanks for the information, collecting his glass and making his way toward Eleanor's table. She looked up as he approached, her keen eyes taking his measure in a single glance. "Care to join, stranger? 5-card draw, $2 buy-in." Her voice carried a hint of the South, cultured, but with an edge that suggested she'd learned hard lessons along the way. Samuel set his glass down and pulled out a chair. "Samuel Blackwood. Much obliged for the invitation, Mrs. Dupree." A flicker of surprise crossed her features. "The bartender has a loose tongue, but please, call me Eleanor. Mrs. Dupree makes me feel like my mother-in-law." As the evening progressed, Samuel lost a modest sum at cards, enough to be sociable without drawing attention. He nursed his whiskey, listening more than talking, as miners, cowboys, and townspeople filtered in and out of the game. When the opportunity presented itself, during a lull between hands, he directed a casual question to Eleanor. "I'm looking for someone who might have passed through town. Young Comanche woman named Morning Dove." Eleanor's hands stilled momentarily as she shuffled the deck. "Dangerous business, asking about Indians in mining country," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "More dangerous still when the Indian in question is connected to Arthur Harrison." Samuel held her gaze steadily. "I made a promise to her father. I intend to keep it." Eleanor studied him for a long moment before dealing the next hand. "Meet me after closing. Midnight. We'll talk then." True to her word, as the last patron stumbled out into the night and the bartender locked the front doors, Eleanor led Samuel to her private office at the back of the saloon. The room was surprisingly elegant. A Persian rug, leather-bound books on cherry-wood shelves, and a desk that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Boston law firm. She poured 2 generous measures of bourbon from a crystal decanter. "This isn't the rot gut we serve at the bar," she said, handing him a glass before settling into a high-backed chair. "Now tell me why a former Texas Ranger is looking for a Comanche woman in my town." Samuel sipped the excellent bourbon, appreciating her directness. He told her about White Eagle saving his life during a skirmish years ago, about the chief's recent death, and the promise Samuel had made to find Morning Dove and ensure her safety. Eleanor listened without interruption, her shrewd eyes assessing the truth of his words. "Morning Dove is at Harrison's estate," Eleanor confirmed when he finished. "She arrived 2 months ago. Harrison paraded her through town like a prize thoroughbred before taking her up to his mansion in the hills. She's not the first young woman to catch his eye, but she's certainly the most exotic by Redemption Creek standards." Samuel's jaw tightened. Is she there willingly? Eleanor swirled the amber liquid in her glass. That's the complicated part. Harrison has a system. He employs beautiful young women as housekeepers, maids, and such. Pays them well enough that it doesn't look like coercion. But once they're isolated up at his estate, things change. Some say he fancies himself a collector of beautiful things, including women. Others say it's more sinister than that. She took a measured sip of bourbon. 3 women who worked for him have disappeared in the last year. The sheriff investigated, but found nothing. Or claimed to find nothing. Samuel's eyes narrowed. And where does Sheriff Miller stand in all this? Eleanor gave a humorless laugh. Jeremiah's a decent man caught in an impossible situation. Harrison practically owns this town. Cross him, and you might find yourself without a job, a home, or worse. The sheriff does what he can within those constraints. She leaned forward, her expression serious. But there's more to the story of Mourning Dove. Harrison is hosting a grand party at his estate in 3 days. Word is he intends to announce his engagement to her. This revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. If Harrison married Mourning Dove, extracting her would become infinitely more complicated, legally and practically. 3 days, he murmured, calculating rapidly. I need to get into that estate, assess the situation, determine if she's there of her own free will. Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. As it happens, I received an invitation to Harrison's party. Respectable business owners are always welcome at such events. It creates the illusion of community support. I wasn't planning to attend, but perhaps I could, with a distinguished escort from out of town. The next morning found Samuel at the livery stable. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, he needed to scout Harrison's estate, get a sense of its layout and security before attempting any closer approach. The stable owner, a weathered man named Jenkins with a pronounced limp, was already at work when Samuel arrived. Looking to rent a horse for the day? Samuel explained, extending payment. Jenkins eyed the money, then Samuel. Heading anywhere in particular, mister? Some trails around here can be treacherous if you don't know them. There was something in the man's tone, a subtle warning, or perhaps an offer of guidance. Samuel decided to test the waters. Thought I might ride up toward the foothills, get a view of the countryside. Jenkins nodded slowly, his eyes revealing nothing. The northern trail offers the best vistas, passes near the Harrison estate too, though I wouldn't recommend getting too close. Harrison's men don't take kindly to curiosity. He selected a sturdy chestnut gelding from the stalls. This is Chief, sure-footed and quiet, won't draw attention. The ride into the foothills took most of the morning. Samuel followed Jenkins' suggested route, which indeed provided excellent vantage points from which to observe the surrounding countryside. By midday, he had his first clear view of the Harrison estate, an impressive mansion of stone and timber set against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. A high wall surrounded the property, with a wrought iron gate at the main entrance where 2 armed men stood guard. Beyond the wall, Samuel could make out manicured gardens, a stable, and what appeared to be servants' quarters. The entire compound spoke of wealth, power, and a desire for privacy that bordered on paranoia. Samuel tethered Chief in a small grove of trees and continued on foot, moving through the underbrush with the silent precision that had made him legendary among the rangers. Finding a concealed position on a ridge overlooking the estate, he settled in to watch, his field glass allowing him to study the movements of Harrison's security detail. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel built a mental map of the estate's security patterns. 4 armed men patrolled the perimeter in rotating shifts. The main house had at least 2 more guards stationed at its entrance. All were well armed and moved with the practiced vigilance of men accustomed to violence. Getting in undetected would be challenging, but not impossible for someone with his experience. More concerning was getting out again, potentially with Mourning Dove in tow. As he was considering various approaches, movement in the gardens caught his attention. A young woman in a pale blue dress walked along a stone path, accompanied by an older woman who appeared to be a chaperone or maid. Even from a distance, Samuel recognized the grace in her movements. Mourning Dove had grown into a beautiful young woman since he'd last seen her as a child in her father's camp. She moved with purpose, but seemed at ease, stopping occasionally to examine flowers or speak to her companion. There was no obvious sign of coercion or distress, which complicated matters considerably. Samuel was so focused on Mourning Dove that he almost missed the approach of riders on the trail below his position. He flattened himself against the earth as 3 mounted men passed beneath him, Harrison's security making wider sweeps of the surrounding area. Their conversation drifted up to his hiding place. "Boss wants extra security for the party. Says he's not taking chances with his big announcement. Marrying an Indian girl? That'll raise some eyebrows even here. Raise more than eyebrows back east. His business partners won't like it. Who says they need to know?" Once the mining rights are secured, the voices faded as they moved down the trail, but Samuel had heard enough to fuel his concerns. If Harrison was using Mourning Dove to secure some sort of claim or rights, it suggested motives far more calculating than mere infatuation. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as Samuel made his way back to Chief and began the ride to town, his mind working through what he'd learned and what he still needed to discover. The next evening found Samuel seated beside Eleanor in her carriage as they approached Harrison's estate. "Remember, you're Samuel Bradford, a cattle baron from Wyoming looking to invest in mining operations," Eleanor reminded him, adjusting her elegant emerald gown. Samuel tugged uncomfortably at the formal attire he'd acquired for the occasion, a far cry from his usual practical clothing. "And you're considering introducing me to potential investors back east?" He completed the fabricated story. "I remember." The Colt hidden beneath his tailored jacket provided some comfort as they passed through the gates of the Harrison estate. Guards nodded respectfully to Eleanor, barely giving Samuel the second glance. Exactly as planned. The mansion was ablaze with light, music spilling from open doors as servants guided arriving carriages. Samuel offered Eleanor his arm as they ascended the marble steps to the entrance, where a butler announced them to the gathering. Mrs. Eleanor Dupree and Mr. Samuel Bradford. Arthur Harrison moved through his assembled guests like a benevolent monarch, accepting compliments on his home and hospitality with practiced charm. In his mid-40s, he cut an impressive figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a meticulously groomed beard and eyes that calculated worth and weakness in equal measure. When he reached Eleanor and Samuel, his smile widened. "Mrs. Dupree, a delight as always, and Mr. Bradford, I've heard you're interested in our little mining enterprise." Samuel shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the signet ring that adorned Harrison's little finger. "Word travels fast," Samuel replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've had some success with cattle, but they say diversification is the path to true wealth." Harrison laughed appreciatively. "A man after my own heart. We must speak later about potential opportunities, but first, allow me to introduce you to someone special." With a gesture, Harrison summoned Mourning Dove from where she had been speaking with other guests. She approached with graceful dignity, her traditional Comanche beauty enhanced rather than diminished by the elegant European gown she wore. "My dear, this is Mrs. Dupree, who owns the Lucky Strike in town, and her guest, Mr. Bradford from Wyoming." Mourning Dove offered a perfect, practiced curtsy that struck Samuel as utterly foreign to the spirited girl he remembered from her father's camp. "A pleasure to meet you both," she said, her English flawless, but her eyes carefully guarded. Samuel bowed slightly, searching her face for any sign of recognition. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Mourning Dove," Harrison interjected proudly. "A beautiful name for a beautiful woman, wouldn't you agree, Bradford?" Samuel nodded, his expression neutral. "Indeed, you're fortunate to have found such remarkable companionship so far from civilization, Mr. Harrison." The evening progressed with the languid rhythm of high society transplanted to the frontier. Samuel circulated among the guests, building his cover story while gathering information and keeping track of Mourning Dove's whereabouts. She performed her role as Harrison's companion perfectly, gracious, attentive, and unfailingly polite. Yet Samuel noticed how Harrison's hand often lingered possessively at the small of her back, how her smile never quite reached her eyes, and how she subtly tensed when he spoke on her behalf. During dinner, Harrison rose to make his anticipated announcement. "Friends, neighbors, esteemed guests, I've brought you here tonight not just to enjoy my hospitality, but to share in my happiness. In 3 weeks' time, Mourning Dove will do me the great honor of becoming my wife." Polite applause followed, though Samuel noted the varying degrees of enthusiasm among the guests. Some seemed genuinely pleased, others merely accepting, and a few, mostly the wives of Eastern investors, barely concealed their disapproval. As the night wore on, Samuel managed to engineer a moment alone with Mourning Dove in the garden. She had stepped outside for air during the dancing, and he followed at a discreet distance, ensuring they weren't observed. "Your father sent me," he said quietly as they stood beside a stone fountain, his words nearly lost beneath the sound of flowing water. Mourning Dove's composure faltered for just an instant, genuine emotion flashing across her face. "My father is dead." Samuel nodded solemnly. "I was with him at the end. He asked me to find you, to make sure you were safe." She glanced toward the house, her expression guarded once more. "I am quite safe, Mr. Bradford. Arthur takes very good care of me." Samuel studied her carefully. "Does he? Or is he using you to take care of his interests?" Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing. "You know nothing of my situation." "Then tell me," he pressed gently. "Are you here by choice? Does Harrison treat you well? Your father would want to know." Mourning Dove's carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the pain and conflict beneath. "My father would understand necessity," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fountain. "The reservation is dying. My people starve while the government agents grow fat. Arthur offers protection, not just for me, but for my extended family. He has influence with officials who determine rations, who enforce boundaries." Samuel's suspicions deepened. "And what does he ask in return?" Mourning Dove's gaze dropped to the fountain. "Only that I be his wife, that I learn the ways of his world, that I help him communicate with tribal leaders regarding certain mining rights." Before she could say more, footsteps approached on the garden path. Mourning Dove quickly composed herself. "The roses are particularly lovely this time of year, don't you think, Mr. Bradford?" she said in a louder voice as Harrison appeared around a hedge, his expression pleasant, but his eyes sharp with suspicion. Ah, Bradford, I see you've discovered my future wife's passion for gardening, Harrison said smoothly, placing a proprietorial hand on Morning Dove's shoulder. The grounds have flourished under her care. Samuel nodded, matching Harrison's casual tone. Mrs. Dupree was just telling me about your mining operations. Quite impressive by all accounts. Harrison beamed with pride, his suspicion momentarily forgotten. I'd be happy to give you a tour of our main site tomorrow. Nothing like seeing the potential firsthand. Samuel accepted the invitation with apparent enthusiasm, recognizing it as both an opportunity and a test. As they returned to the house, Morning Dove walked slightly ahead, her back straight, her steps measured. But when she glanced back once, Samuel caught the message in her eyes. A silent plea for understanding, perhaps for help. Whatever game she was playing with Harrison, whatever compromise she had made for her people's sake, the daughter of White Eagle was not at peace with her situation. The following day found Samuel at the Silver Strike mine, following Harrison through tunnels where men worked in conditions that ranged from difficult to dangerous. We've struck 3 new veins in the last month alone, Harrison explained proudly as they observed miners attacking the rock face. At this rate, we'll double production by year's end. Samuel noted the exhaustion etched on the miners' faces, the hasty timber supports, and the children, some no older than 10, sorting ore in the dim light. Impressive operation, he commented neutrally. Though the conditions seem challenging. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. Mining isn't for the faint of heart, Bradford. These men earn twice what they'd make back east. As for the children, better they learn an honest trade than run wild. They emerged into sunlight, where wagons were being loaded with ore for transport to the smelter. But the real opportunity lies beyond our current claims, Harrison continued, lowering his voice. The richest silver deposits are under Comanche hunting grounds to the north. Once my marriage to Morning Dove is formalized, her tribal connections will help us negotiate access, one way or another. As they rode back toward town, Samuel's mind worked through what he'd learned. Harrison's plan was becoming clearer. Marry Morning Dove to gain influence with her tribe, secure mining rights to their ancestral lands, and expand his empire at their expense. It was a coldly calculated move, disguised as romance, and Morning Dove appeared to be a willing participant, at least on the surface. But the look in her eyes in the garden told a different story. She was making her own bargain, trying to secure whatever advantages she could for her people in a game where all the cards were stacked against them. Back in town, Samuel parted from Harrison with promises of future investment discussions and returned to his room at the hotel, where he found an unexpected visitor waiting. Sheriff Miller sat in the chair by the window, his expression grave. "Blackwood, we need to talk. Harrison's foreman recognized you from your ranger days. Your cover's blown." Sheriff Miller leaned forward, his voice low. "Harrison knows who you are and why you're really here. One of his men overheard part of your conversation with Morning Dove in the garden. He's moving up the wedding to tomorrow and plans to deal with you tonight. My deputy heard them planning an ambush at your hotel." Samuel absorbed this information with the calm of a man accustomed to having his plans derailed. "Why are you telling me this, Sheriff? Seems like backing Harrison would be the safer play for a man in your position." Miller's jaw tightened. "Because I've been looking the other way too long. 3 young women have vanished from Harrison's estate in the past year. No bodies, no witnesses, just gone. I couldn't prove anything, and without proof, I was powerless against a man with his money and connections. But I'm done being powerless. If you're planning to help Morning Dove, I want in." As darkness fell, Samuel and Sheriff Miller finalized their plan in Eleanor's office behind the saloon. "Harrison has 8 armed men," Miller explained, pointing to a rough map of the estate. 4 patrol the grounds, 2 guard the main house, and 2 are always with Harrison himself. Eleanor, who had insisted on being included, studied the map with a strategic eye. The announcement of the wedding being moved up has the town buzzing. Everyone assumes it's because Harrison can't wait to claim his bride. But those of us who know better, she trailed off, her expression grim. Samuel traced a path along the edge of the property. "The north side has less coverage. If we approach from there after midnight, we might reach the main house undetected. But everything depends on whether Mourning Dove wants to leave. If she's committed to her arrangement with Harrison for her people's sake, ... Sheriff Miller shook his head. "You didn't see what I saw this afternoon. Harrison was practically dragging her to the church to speak with the minister. This isn't an arrangement anymore, it's captivity." Under the cover of darkness, Samuel, Sheriff Miller, and 2 deputies that Miller trusted implicitly made their approach to the Harrison estate. They left their horses tethered a half-mile away and continued on foot, moving silently through the pine forest that bordered the northern edge of the property. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Samuel thought of White Eagle, of the promise made, and of the look in Mourning Dove's eyes. They reached the stone wall surrounding the estate just after midnight. With practiced efficiency, Samuel secured a rope and grappling hook to the top of the wall, testing it before beginning his climb. One by one, they scaled the barrier and dropped into the darkness of the grounds beyond. Using the cover of ornamental hedges and trees, they made their way toward the main house, freezing in place whenever a patrol passed nearby. They reached the servants' entrance at the rear of the mansion without incident. The door was locked, but one of Miller's deputies made quick work of it with a set of picks. Inside, they moved through darkened corridors, guided by the floor plan Eleanor had sketched based on her observations during the party. According to the household staff who frequented the Lucky Strike, Mourning Dove's quarters were on the 2nd floor, east wing. As they ascended the grand staircase, a floorboard creaked beneath Samuel's boot. They froze, listening intently, but the house remained silent. At the top of the stairs, they split up as planned, the deputies to secure their escape route, Miller to watch the corridor leading to Harrison's rooms, and Samuel to find Mourning Dove. The thick carpets muffled their footsteps as they separated, each moving with deliberate care through the sleeping mansion. Samuel found Mourning Dove's room exactly where Eleanor had indicated. He tried the handle, locked from the outside, confirming Miller's assessment of her status. Using the deputy's picks, he opened the door silently and slipped inside. The room was luxuriously appointed, but felt more like a gilded cage than a lady's chamber. Mourning Dove was awake, sitting by the window in a white nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She turned at his entrance, showing no surprise. "I knew you would come," she whispered, rising to her feet. "Arthur has men watching the hotel. How did you escape them?" Samuel moved closer, speaking softly. "Sheriff Miller warned me. He's helping us. But we need to move quickly. Harrison's moving up the wedding to tomorrow." Mourning Dove's expression hardened. "I heard. After our conversation in the garden, he decided I needed less freedom." She moved to a wardrobe and began retrieving clothing. "I'm ready to leave. I've learned enough about Arthur's plans to know that any promises to help my people were lies. He intends to strip our lands and leave us with nothing." As Mourning Dove changed behind a screen, Samuel kept watch at the door. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "You risk yourself to protect your people." She emerged dressed in a simple riding outfit, practical for their escape. "My father taught me that sacrifice for the tribe is honorable, but that wisdom sometimes means knowing when a sacrifice is futile." She retrieved a small leather pouch from beneath a floorboard. "These are documents detailing Harrison's plans for the tribal lands. Evidence of bribes to government officials, forged signatures on treaties. I've been collecting them for weeks." Samuel's estimation of her rose even higher. Mourning Dove had never been a passive participant in Harrison's scheme. She had been conducting her own intelligence mission all along. They moved to the door, but as Samuel reached for the handle, voices sounded in the corridor outside. "Check all the rooms," Harrison's distinctive voice commanded. "If Blackwood's in my house, I want him found." Samuel and Mourning Dove exchanged quick glances. There was no time to wait for the search to pass. They needed to move immediately. Samuel opened the door a crack, peering into the corridor. Two armed men were checking rooms methodically, working their way toward them. In the opposite direction, he glimpsed Sheriff Miller signaling urgently from an alcove. Samuel took Mourning Dove's hand, and they slipped into the hallway, moving quickly and silently toward Miller. They had almost reached him when one of the searchers turned. "Hey, stop right there!" The man raised his revolver, but Miller was faster, firing a single shot that caught the guard in the shoulder. Chaos erupted as the wounded man screamed. The other guard returned fire, and doors flew open throughout the house. "Run!" Samuel shouted, drawing his Colt and providing covering fire as Mourning Dove and Miller raced toward the servants' staircase. They descended amid a hail of bullets, splinters flying from the banisters around them. At the bottom of the stairs, they met the deputies who had been alerted by the gunfire. "Front gates blocked," one reported breathlessly. "They've got men stationed there." Samuel made a split-second decision. "The stables. If we can get horses, we can break through the east perimeter where the wall's lowest." They moved as a group through the kitchen and out a side door, running low across the moonlit grounds toward the stables. Behind them, Harrison's voice rose above the confusion, ordering men to search the grounds, to bring dogs, to find them at any cost. They reached the stables just as mounted guards began to fan out from the main house. Samuel and Miller threw open the doors, while the deputies quickly saddled 5 horses. Mourning Dove moved with practiced ease among the animals, calming them despite the commotion. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving toward the eastern wall, riding hard through the manicured gardens, trampling flower beds and toppling statuary in their wake. The east wall loomed before them, 6 feet of solid stone. Beyond it lay freedom, but the approach was exposed, moonlight revealing them clearly to any watching eyes. Gunfire erupted from their left. Harrison's men had spotted them. Bullets kicked up dirt around their horses' hooves as they galloped the final stretch. "Stay tight together," Samuel called, urging his mount to greater speed. Miller and the deputies returned fire, providing what cover they could. The wall was just ahead now, its top a jagged line against the night sky. "Follow me," Mourning Dove cried, suddenly pulling ahead and guiding her horse toward a specific section of the wall. Samuel remembered his reconnaissance. This was indeed the lowest point, but it was still a formidable barrier. As they reached it, Mourning Dove's horse gathered itself and leaped, clearing the top of the wall with inches to spare. One by one, they followed, horses straining with the effort, but making the jump clean. They rode hard through the night, following game trails through the wilderness to evade pursuit. By dawn, They had put considerable distance between themselves and the Harrison estate, eventually stopping at a small cabin that Miller maintained as a hunting lodge. As they tended to their exhausted horses, Mourning Dove approached Samuel. In the golden light of sunrise, her beauty was striking, not the cultivated elegance Harrison had imposed, but the natural grace of her heritage. "I never thanked you," she said softly, "for keeping your promise to my father." Samuel shook his head. "No thanks needed. A debt repaid, that's all." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his weathered face. "I'm not beautiful enough for a man like Arthur Harrison," she said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Not without fine dresses and lessons in deportment. That's what he told me when he thought I was being difficult." Samuel looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing the strength, intelligence, and dignity that Harrison had tried to shape to his purposes. "Then the stars lied to my eyes," he replied simply, "because I see a woman as beautiful and enduring as the land itself." 2 days later, Samuel stood on the platform of the Redemption Creek train station. The documents Mourning Dove had collected had been dispatched to federal authorities in Denver, and Harrison's empire was already beginning to crumble. Sheriff Miller had sworn out warrants for his arrest on charges ranging from kidnapping to attempted murder, and Eleanor Dupree was organizing the miners to demand better conditions and fair wages. Mourning Dove adjusted her hat against the morning sun as the eastbound train pulled into the station, steam billowing around the platform. "The tribal council will use the evidence to fight the mining claims," she said, her voice strong with purpose. "With the federal investigation underway, we have a chance to protect our remaining lands." Samuel nodded, proud of all she had accomplished and would continue to achieve. "Your father chose wisely when he made you his heir." The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. Mourning Dove reached out, taking Samuel's hand in both of hers. "Will you come visit the reservation someday? Tell me more stories of my father in his younger days." Samuel squeezed her hands gently. "I'd like that." He helped her aboard, then stepped back as the train began to move. Mourning Dove leaned from the window, the wind catching her hair. "Remember, Samuel Blackwood," she called as the train gathered speed, "when you look at the stars, they never lie." Samuel raised the hand in farewell, watching until the train was nothing but a smudge of smoke against the distant mountains. He turned to find Sheriff Miller waiting nearby. "What will you do now, Blackwood?" the sheriff asked as they walked back toward town. Samuel adjusted his hat, considering the question. The promise to White Eagle had been fulfilled, but there were other promises, other debts in this vast country. Other people who needed someone to stand between them and those who would use or discard them. "Head north for a while," he decided. "There's word of trouble in the Dakota Territory, settlers pushing into sacred lands." Miller nodded in understanding. "The work's never done, is it?" Samuel looked back once more at the vanishing train, thinking of Mourning Dove and the strength she had found within herself. "No," he agreed, "but sometimes it's worth doing all the same." As the sun climbed higher in the sky over Redemption Creek, Samuel Blackwood mounted his faithful mare Dakota and turned her head north. The town behind him was already changing, shaking off Harrison's influence and finding its own voice. Ahead lay new horizons, new challenges, and perhaps someday, a return to a Comanche reservation where a remarkable woman was helping her people forge a future on their own terms. The road stretched before him, dusty and uncertain, but beckoning all the same. With a gentle touch of his spurs, Samuel set Dakota to a trot, leaving Redemption Creek to its newfound redemption. The lesson of Mourning Dove would stay with him, that true beauty lay not in appearances, but in courage, in principle, and in the willingness to stand firm when everything else wavered. And somewhere, he thought, White Eagle was smiling among the stars that never lied. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.